don't just build community, also seek it. And what I mean by that is most community teams are really small. A lot of them are one person, maybe two. A lot of community managers are kind of out there on their own trying to build community as one person, and that is really hard. There are fantastic communities of community professionals, and people are so generous. I find that community professionals, more than just about any other field, everybody's just like, we feel like it's a rising tide raises all boats. People aren't competitive. They're excited to share what they've learned and what has worked for them, but also get to know other people and other functions at your company.
Nicole, how's it going?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Great. And we first met in New York,
Yep.
and we met the day before a Zendesk showcase in New York. And you were organizing this community event, and you and your entire team are always wonderful, friendly, thoughtful, and really it's interesting how you put things together. And we've gotten to hang out a few times since then. And I'm always impressed with your ability to build community and just who you are as a person. And people might also be wondering, Hassan from Knots, a company that makes Zendesk automation apps, like why do I care about community? Just so folks know, I myself have been a facilitator for 18 years, but also we automate things so people can be more human, connect, and spend time together, right? So, Nicole, you're director of community at Zendesk. You're
Mm-hmm.
also a podcast host, a writer, and I wanted to dive in and learn more about you. And I think the start of that is, could you talk to me about your journey? Where'd you come from and how'd you get your superpowers?
I was born with the superpowers. No, I mean, even as a little kid, I was always the person that was like organizing the tag game in my front yard or trying to convince the other kids in the neighborhood that we should put on a play together. Or I've always been somebody that just likes bringing people together, likes building connections, likes being a resource for people. So I would say that I was sort of predisposed to being a community professional. And I love that you mentioned the writing piece because that's really where my career started. I had always wanted to be a writer. When I graduated from college, I found a local magazine that accepted freelancers, and I literally like rolled up with like my senior year like capstone essay as my writing sample. And they hired me, and so I started as a freelance writer writing feature articles for a local magazine, and from there kind of built out my writing, and eventually all the magazines moved online, and it was pay per click. So this is the early thousands, and I had to figure out how to use social media and kind of build a following so that I could earn money as a writer and get clicks on my articles. And from there, I was already sort of working for myself and freelancing. And now I'd built up this skill set around social media and branding and communications and sort of the early stages of community management. And I started getting hired by other small businesses to do this for them. I eventually took an internship at a marketing agency to build out their social media and community program. So I started as an intern. By the time I left there 4.5 years later, I was like their senior community manager. I was training other people on how to run the community program. And I'd done lots of contracts in that role, and particularly like the ones that I did with early stage tech companies and tech startups. And so I got recruited to help launch Built in Colorado when it went out to the Front Range. So they started with Built in Chicago and Built in LA, and then I helped launch the Colorado one. Um, and just kind of got engaged with things from there. And that eventually got me recruited out to Silicon Valley, where I was the first marketing hire for a virtual reality company 10 years ago. And I did everything marketing wise there, from community to event marketing to internal comms. And then when I came to Zendesk, I got to really focus in on community. But I think that start as a freelancer and running my own business was really critical. When you talk about superpowers, I think in addition to being really just naturally into connecting people, it's been about running the community like I would run my own business and really being able to always have awareness of all of the different parts of the business and how community connects in and supports all of it. And I really think that a lot of that came from those early days of running my own business and learning it from the ground up.
Amazing. You know what's so funny? I didn't know this either, but the funny thing is that actually this connection that you have on organizing things and just that disposition, I have that too. And
Mhm.
a funny thread that we have that's similar that never came up in other conversations is I used to teach Latin dancing, and to do like Latin dancing events, I really had to use Facebook and other avenues,
Yep.
and like how to make people, because okay, people like to dance, but they don't want to dance every week. So they come because they want to spend time with friends, right? They come because they want to be part of something that's outside of themselves, right? That's about connecting. And so that's really neat. It sounds like, yeah, sounds like that was really a big part of your life. And the funny thing too is mine too. And that's when I also started kind of conceptualize what community meant. I'm curious to know, like, what is your definition of community?
It's really about people connecting to each other. This comes up a lot in business. I've typically run brand product related communities. And I always, when people ask me like, what's the scope of your program or what's your charter? And I describe it as it's everything that's about connecting customers to each other, not just about their relationship with the company, not about connecting them to us, but connecting them to one another, getting them to build their own thing. And the thing that makes my heart the happiest is when I see that community take on a life of its own. And it's really cool because at Zendesk, I remember some things where it's like, I remember the lunch with my team where we came up with an idea. And you mentioned Relate this year. We walked into Relate and I was like, you guys, this is the thing. It's the thing that we imagined a couple of years ago. Here it is in real life. It's happening. And when we see our members, part of what excites me so much about our user group program is they're running their own events. They're building their own community. They've got their own in jokes and memes that like even my team isn't a part of. And I love that. And I've seen that over and over again, whether it's the Built in Colorado stuff. I also helped co-found the Mile High Young Professionals, and they just celebrated their 10-year anniversary. And like, I don't even know anybody who's part of the organization anymore, but it's still going. And I helped plant the seeds for that. And I had to laugh when you mentioned common threads and teaching Latin dance because I taught swing dance when I was in college. And same kind of thing, right? It's how do you build the community? Because just offering the service or the content isn't enough. People aren't going to participate on a regular basis unless there's something there that they need every week. And what's the one thing that everybody needs every week? It's human connection.
My wife is a swing dancer, so I've had to take that up too. I
There
like it.
you go.
I like it.
Well,
And
next time we're in person, we'll have to go find a spot to do some dancing.
yeah, I gotta practice. That's cool. That's really cool. You mentioned too, well, and so yeah, I love that definition of community, which is, if I get it right, is that getting customers connected to one another. And it sounds like as also in ways that are unexpected and continuous, right? Is like part of what you're setting up. And
Continuous is really critical, right? I think it's one of the things that defines the difference between a highly engaged audience and a community. An audience shows up once and they might have a great sense of community while they're there, but then they leave and they don't reconnect. Community requires repeated connection over time.
awesome. And can like on that note too, and you mentioned it a little bit, but I'm really interested if I was thinking about like a critical moment for you or a decision
Yeah.
that you made in order to make that come true, right? Like with that idea in mind, like is there something for you? You mentioned Relate, but yeah, is there something like a moment or strategy or approach that you've taken maybe recently that you really feel like was a turning point that allowed that to move towards a path that you were wanting it to?
I think the biggest thing was launching our user groups. And that came up really organically. I like to tell the evolution of the community ecosystem at Zendesk, and I'll do a very, very brief version here. But when I started, our job was to make sure that product support questions for one product community got answered. And now we have this huge program that is like all of the discussion forums and community events and user groups and brand advocates. But each of those things came up organically, right? We started with like, we're going to do AMAs in the community. And you know what an AMA is, right? Reddit style, like some expert comes in and you can ask them anything and they answer it in the community in a given period of time. And people thought it was so cool, but they're like, well, where can I watch it? And we're like, well, no, it's in the community. It's like written. And they're like, oh, okay. So is there like a recording? And so after like 3 or 4 of these where like people were not getting that this wasn't like a meeting or an event, we were like, you know what, let's give the people what they want. We're already getting on a Zoom call to sort out all the answers for these questions. Let's invite everybody to it. And like that launched our webinars, right? And then at the webinars, people were getting in the chat and talking to each other. Like, man, we love talking to each other. I wish we could like do this more. And like, yeah, there's the forum, but that's not quite real time. And so we were like, well, let's give the people what they want. And we launched user groups. And our user group program empowers end users to form a group of people. And because it happened in this hybrid era after COVID, it didn't just require, hey, this is the Denver user group or the Chicago user group, but people could meet with people based around an interest. And so we have like a Zendesk administrators user group. We have one for developers. We have one that just talks about AI. We have one that's just for startups. And it's really cool because they can organize around a location or an interest or a segment or a sector or even a thematic topic. And I think it was giving the users and the members of our community that opportunity to lead themselves, form groups based on what they wanted without too much oversight from us. And one of our rules is nobody from Zendesk shows up unless we're invited. It really is their space, and we empower them, we help them, we support them, but it's theirs. And I think that that was one of the big turning points for us, like I said, where the community started to take on a life of its own and its own ownership, and also really helped us to scale in a way that we wouldn't have been able to with stuff that we just ran. So to me, that was the biggest turning point and probably one of the big shining moments for me in my time here at Zendesk.
Such a good story about how, yeah, taking this thing, it's interesting because in some cases I could even know I know like some of the background to some of these decisions in different organizations, and sometimes it's scary to like unleash the you to just like unleash it, like let it run wild, and there's a fear in that. And I think it's really amazing how you cultivated that in such a nice way with your team, and how you guys kind of look after the way that that would grow. And yeah, there are, well, I just talked to Brandon Tidd recently
Yeah.
too, and like, I found him because, well, he's very active on a lot of the forums, but also because I was able to drop into a community group. And in my journey, in my role, it was really important for me that, okay, we have all these automations to do stuff on Zendesk, but what do people actually need? And also, I had to learn about how Zendesk works when I first came into my role. And what better way to do that than to sit and listen and hear how other people are using it, right? And like, do it that way. So not only was it just seeing this amazing network of folks, but it was also really helping my learning curve as a professional in the field, trying to approach like people that need things that we offer. And it gave me a real sense of yeah, like belonging and a welcomeness to it that I think is really something to be proud of. So yeah, it's an awesome job you've done.
Well,
Um,
thank you. And I'm so glad to hear that.
yeah, yeah. Well, and also too, I had this thought. So I remember at Zendesk Relate, you had this, we all went to Las Vegas and then go to the event space, and then there's this big long table at the event space filled with Legos, right? Like filled
Mhm.
with a bunch of Legos and little characters and little faces, and they're different colored skins and shirts and stuff like that, and hats and all sorts of stuff for these little Lego characters. And so people are invited to make an avatar of themselves, right? And then kind of like write a little something about themselves and then put it onto this community role in the event space so that there was representation in this really cool like embodied form that people created themselves. So I can make my avatar however I want, and I can put
Right.
it up there in whichever way I want. And I thought it was just such a good example of what an amazing invitation for people to show up however they wish to show up and be represented. And I'm like super curious, is that something that you've done before? Like how do these type of ideas come to life? Like what's the process?
Well, first, I have to give a huge shout out to Zendesk's creative team because they're just absolutely amazing. They come up with brilliant ideas. We had a number of meetings and discussions with them about what we wanted the community activations to look like. But when we showed up and saw it in real life, we were like, oh my gosh, this is even better than I was hoping for. And the way that the Legos came up, we said, we want to have something that, as you just said, visually represents our community and visually represents it growing. That event in particular is all about people connecting with each other. That's our Super Bowl, if you will. And so we wanted to make sure we had good representation of that. And I also said, we're talking a lot about AI. All these people are behind computers day to day. Most of the sessions here, people are going to just be sitting and listening or taking notes. I want something that's like tactile, something they can do with their hands, something creative that they can engage with, kind of take a mental break and do something really different. And so we kind of took those themes of, okay, we want to visually represent the community and show it growing, and we want to give people like a craft or something to do. And the creative team came back with this Lego idea. We loved it, and to your point, it gave people this opportunity not only to sort of like represent themselves in the community, but the cue was talk about your CX superpower. And so it wasn't just go find Legos that look just like you and put it on the wall and tell us that you're Brandon from Ohio. It was, what's your avatar? If you were a CX superhero, what would that character be? And so mine, I think, it was like the community maven or something like that. And I put ski goggles on it because I'm a big skier and I just gotten back from a big ski trip. She had a microphone and like a little like cheerleading thing, right? Because that's what I'm always doing. I'm always getting everybody to rally around and get things started. And so I think it was really cool to see that. And now everybody, the great thing is like everybody walked home with a little souvenir, and people have asked us like, are you gonna do that again next year? I think this is gonna become like a tradition for Zendesk now. People are gonna have like their collection of Lego mini me's.
Yeah, that was so cool. I think a lot of people are gonna be borrowing that idea, let's say, or taking that and adapting it because it
I'm
was a
here for
really neat.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we probably have like just I think I have just a few more questions, but one of them too is so I think that's a really good example of like a facilitation technique. Like it's like there's like a certain style to it, right? Like it's
Mhm.
that idea of like it's tactiles, but you do things in person and virtually, and I'm just interested, do you have like a favorite, your go-to facilitation thing to get people engaged, like an engagement tool or like an approach that you have?
So as far as approaches go, my big thing is I like to give people a heads up that I'm going to be asking them to engage later in the conversation. A lot of people are scared of public speaking. I'm not. That's probably my true superpower is I love being behind a microphone and most people hate it. But you never want to freak people out. You never want to put them on the spot, right? They're not going to share as much or they're going to clam up or be a little nervous. And so I always like to say, hey, everybody, in about 20 minutes, we're going to go around the circle and I'm going to ask you a question. Here's what that question is going to be. So you have a little time to think about it. Now, of course, you have to balance that with also wanting them to focus on stuff between now and then and not just think about their answer to the question. And then one of my favorite sort of like icebreaker things to get people started is to say, what is your favorite thing to do outside of work? Especially when we're in a professional setting, because we're so used to talking about our identity as our job and what we do and professional things. And it's great to get to know people a little bit outside of work. And keeping it open ended like that lets people choose what they want to reveal. It's not as specific as where do you live or are you married or do you have kids or any of these things that like people may or may not want to share. And if you say, hey, what's your favorite thing outside of work? They get to share some piece of their life. And it's something that they love, something they're excited about and passionate about. And it makes them feel seen. It makes them feel welcomed. And then you learn interesting things about people. So I'll tell you, even when I go to like a party or something, I never ask people what they do. I ask them what their favorite thing outside of work is. Because I want to know who they are as a human and get to know them a little bit as a person. And that question seems to work really well for that purpose.
That's why it's always fun to hang out with you. Because yeah, we're not trying to just sit in that boring, right? What are you gonna do later today or something like that? That's a great question. And I also love the prep thing. And I think I've seen that pulled off really well too in communities that are really virtual, right? So asking people in the chat to put their thoughts in first. And then after that, you might call out what someone said and ask them if they want to share more. Kind of like, yeah, it's those stages, right? Because I think you're absolutely right. A lot of times, sometimes community is about letting people just sit and listen if they want, right? Like not putting them on the
Absolutely.
spot. And
Yeah.
um, I could probably ask you a thousand other things. My last question is, what advice would you give someone in a community role? What wisdom would you share with them from all your time in the trenches?
Don't just build community, also seek it. And what I mean by that is most community teams are really small. A lot of them are one person, maybe two. a lot of community managers are kind of out there on their own trying to build community as one person, and that is really hard. There are fantastic communities of community professionals, and people are so generous. I find that community professionals, more than just about any other field, everybody's just like, we feel like it's a rising tide raises all boats. People aren't competitive. They're excited to share what they've learned and what has worked for them, but also get to know other people and other functions at your company. The single best thing I have done in my career is about once a week, I go into the company directory. I find someone who I've never met, ideally with a title that I've never heard of before, and I ask them if we can have a Zoom coffee and I can learn about what they do. And it has helped me not only build really important relationships, but to really get a handle on the business and what resources are available and what other teams are thinking about. And it's so critical to be able to do that and not just sit in a silo trying to solve problems by yourself. So don't just build community, also go seek it.
Can you shout out a few of those community organization names that because I wouldn't know them myself.
Yeah.
Like, is there some?
The longest standing one that I think most of the professionals I know are involved with is CMX. And so I
Okay.
believe their site is cmxhub.com. They also have a Slack community. There's one for more senior community professionals called the Community Community. So if you've been doing it for 3 years or more, that's one that you can join. And then there's one called the Community Club. It was started by ComSor, which was building a community platform. They've gone into other things, but the Community Club has continued on as its own vibrant space. So I would check those out. I also think that Fever and the Community Roundtable have some great resources, and those are places that I look to a lot for information.
That's awesome. I never, yeah, I'm glad I asked. I knew some of those, but not all of them. That's really helpful. And then uh Nicole, I mean, you do a lot and people can find you on the Zendesk podcast or other ways, but what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you if they want to connect?
Probably via LinkedIn. I'm pretty active over there. You can find me. It's Nicole D. Saunders. There's a lot of Nicole Saunderses out there. And then I also have, outside of Zendesk, I have a podcast called CX Nexus. It's just getting off the ground, and it's really exploring the intersections between different aspects of business. And we're always bringing in special guests to interview them. So you can check that out on Apple Podcasts as well.
I can't even keep up with all the stuff you're doing. So yeah, thanks for
My
that.
life is not boring. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, but you're always a wealth of information and I feel like just really genuinely just to say it's always I think the nice thing is that you are so authentically interested in people and you really are exactly the role that you are and it's wonderful to see and I just am so happy that we got to talk because I think a lot of people can grab a lot of value with what you shared and just that idea of like community is about making connecting people with each other and making it long lasting and sustainable for them and you don't have to be part of it because it grows and ebbs and flows on its own and so yeah thanks so much Nicole and have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you, Hassan. This is great.